Good afternoon. Welcome to the South Africa podcast. My name is Fatima Yunisa, and I'm going to be the anchor for the show today, just basically guiding the flow of the discussion. And today we're going to be discussing our topic, calling out versus calling in. How do we have conversations about gender and other tough topics? Before we get into the conversations, we just like to get a brief introduction of our speakers. Once again, thanks for honoring our invitation. So we'll start from this side of the table.
I just say my name. Okay, cool. I'm David Etta. What's up?
Khauhelo Mile.
Hi, I'm Manga from South Africa.
I'm Alexander Sulu from Kenya.
Kambura and also from Kenya.
Hey, welcome to Southie. Wow, what fake enthusiasm. Great. So we know why we're here already. We just want to discuss the culture that we have around having difficult conversations and how we behave in interactions with those ideas and in response to challenges of certain ideas or beliefs or ideologies that we might hold as people. So I'm going to be asking a couple of questions. However, like that, we don't have to stick to that, and we just really like if like it can be more of a conversation that sort of flows. So the first question is: have we created a community where true learning, interaction, and exchange of ideas are encouraged, like in the
No.
ALA community?
No. I personally believe that there's this kind of divide between people that think they are woke and people that, don't really care about that. And therefore, some of the people that think they're woke often feel the right to, force their ideas upon the people that don't. And, if they don't, that sparks up more of a fight than a conversation.
Yeah, I think that quote unquote like not being woke or problematic in a space has room in any conversation. Like I don't think that by sidelining people who don't necessarily share the same views with you or aren't as progressive as you, does that like warrant a good conversation? I think a good conversation caters for the variety of voices in the room, and suppressing the ones that maybe you don't agree with isn't the solution to that. I think that ALA tries to accommodate all of these people, but by virtue of like the student body and the dynamics, I think is unsuccessful to a large extent.
Okay, so like if I'm hearing, like if I've understood you guys right, you feel like there might be a dominant political conversation, that sort of political opinion or orientation that sort of overshadows or does not allow nuanced conversations for people who might not necessarily share opinions that are considered woke or accepted or generally acceptable. Is that what you're trying to say?
You could say that.
To an extent, but to be honest, we don't. This doesn't really happen outside of the boundaries of conversations regarding like feminism and race. Like other than that, I don't see where there is like a dominant voice. I think these two particular things are held dearly by the student body, and because of that, like yeah, people like claim the conversation, but yeah, we haven't really seen what happens outside of those two things, unless I'm mistaken.
Any thoughts? Any comments?
I think there is a level of self-righteousness that comes with being woke or being more knowledgeable or being more politically correct in a specific topic. But I also think there has been a neglect of responsibility in releasing our preconceptions of things that we had before we came here. So there's no fault, because the fault is on both sides in that case, because everyone is so cast upon what they want to think and what they believe that no one wants to let anything they believe in go. Like there's no platform to grow on either end, because we have a group of people who are like, but you're wrong and you stay wrong, and because you're wrong you're a criminal and you're wrong, and we alienate you because you're wrong. But we also have a group of people that are attacked for being wrong. And if you're called out, you're called out. Sometimes I think the whole idea of thinking we're going to have a conversation also is wrong, because it's not going to be a conversation, because clearly someone's going to be attacked or going to feel attacked. So as much as the self-righteous people may be contributing an energy of but you're wrong, and in specific situations like feminism, I don't blame them, because people are angry and we cannot expect them to always subside their anger for people who are always not willing to listen or change behavior. And in that case, then the people who just don't want to let go of their non-politically correct preconceptions are also being a problem, because the more you refuse to let a preconception go and someone has to keep trying to convince you over and over, the angrier the other person becomes, and there's a spark of anger that you have in them that now causes an attack and a defense.
I totally get that. So does anybody have any points, responses to that particular points? No?
I think I'll say for me, a sense of entitlement is very important, but then again is what sparks most controversy within the alien environment, because many times we find that topics that question the identity of people tend to be ones that spark the most controversy, especially in this environment. So if we're talking about the topic of feminism, most people that support feminism actively have come from this background where they have been educated or have fallen under circumstances and experiences that have, caused them to support the cause. But whenever we have this kind of conversations within ALA, they also interact with people who have not necessarily come across feminism as a common concept back home. So a challenge may be, sense of entitlement may come up as a challenge, because instead of trying to make people understand what exactly, in this case for example, what feminism is, or trying to promote a sense of feminism amongst people who have not been exposed to this, it comes as a direct attack to their own beliefs, which can often be misjudged as toxic masculinity. So moving aside from the topic of feminism, to avoid stirring up a debate, I'd just like to say that sense of entitlement is the most dangerous. It's a very dangerous topic, because a sense of entitlement in that aspect would spark controversy within the alien environment.
Okay, so I'm just going to pick you up on that, on when you say a sense of entitlement. So would you say a sense of entitlement on the part of whom? Like, is it the people who feel like they're feminists or they're politically correct, and so they feel entitled to have their opinions be accepted generally and to not be questioned, to not be challenged, because it's somehow true, or to them they hold it true? Or entitlement on the people who will be on the other side of such conversations? Like, so can you?
I think it comes both ways, because when I say sense of entitlement, this stems from, one, how a person is naturally raised, the kind of experiences one has come across by interacting with other people, interacting with the environment. And so when I say a sense of entitlement, it mostly deals with the character of the person and their natural beliefs as a person. So when someone meets an idea that clashes or counteracts their own, then naturally they're going to evoke a natural response that goes against that belief or ideology. So again, within the ALA environment, I believe that people tend to react extremely aggressively rather than trying to bring other people to a point of understanding and reconcile. So I think that's the major problem that comes around sense of entitlement. The fact that people tend to believe that just because they have this particular stance means that that stance is right. And ideally they're not willing to learn, but they're willing to defend their point instead of trying to understand where other people are coming from.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I agree with what you're saying, and I just want to give my own, should I say, analogy. If you're talking about math, for instance, I'm like this is my stuff. I know this thing, so I would already come with a sense of entitlement towards it. But you see, if I'm talking to someone that really doesn't, and I want them to understand, I'm going to put that sense of entitlement and try to put myself in their shoes to understand where they're coming from and guide them through the process of understanding this math better. And this ties into the people that would identify as being more politically correct. You see, if you're talking to someone that really grew up in a or is coming from a background that, let's say, doesn't tie into a lot of the principles of feminism, for instance, I don't think that I understand you're angry, and we're all angry that feminism shouldn't even be a thing, because males and females should be equal. And what I'm trying to say is that you should approach it with the perspective that they really don't understand, and you're walking them through this process. So yeah.
Or maybe they should also be approached. They should be approachable as well, because you don't teach someone who isn't willing to learn. And that is actually the case, because no matter how much people will try to humble themselves or lower themselves and be like, oh yeah, now I'm going to teach you and let you understand, there's still a sense of holding on to the lack of privilege per se. That if they come from where they come from and they didn't have the privilege to learn about the things we know, then why are you holding on to your lack of privilege? To not humble yourself to be able to learn.
Sorry, do you want to go on to the next
No,
question?
no, please go on.
I struggle with the use. Okay, I know that Alex talked about the sense of entitlement, but I'm just going to like rear back to feminism for a second. So I struggle with the use of words like understanding and listening and taking in, because I think in the ways that I've interacted with them most, even the word attacked, I don't see the words applied in a very two-sided way, like in a way where it's understanding on both sides. I think there's something very upsetting about the fact that with almost every system of oppression, it's up to the oppressed to figure out how to rectify that system of oppression. And so it's very, I think, as we talk about this topic and as we make parallels between feminism and math, or feminism and whatever, I think we need to realize the intensity of what feminism is. Like, it's very easy to, especially in this setting where a lot of us are privileged to not have to meet some of the things that people meet every day. Feminism isn't, it's not anything. It's the lives of people. Like, it's people dying. It's like, it's men feeling emasculated at work and coming and beating their wives to death. It's gay men and women being killed because of their sexual orientation. It's women not being able to access multiple opportunities all over the world in all sorts of economies. Like, it's just, I think in a lot of times when we have conversations using the words feminism and patriarchy, these words are and these systems are so heavy, and they mean so much that it's very, when somebody is talking about why they're important, obviously the strategy of how they communicate that is important, but at the same time, it's just very interesting to have to hear, understand, and appreciate and look at this and that. While it's important, hearing those perspectives from somebody who's had to deal with those things their entire life, with aspects of their identity, even though they don't have to, even if their identity doesn't force them to, I think this thing of understand, it always seemed like it's the oppressed who has to understand. And the only reason why you would feel attacked is because you probably attacked first. So me hearing something that's misogynistic, patriarchal, that's an attack to me. So I think oftentimes the response is taken as the attack and not the initial action. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
And so I just struggle to, I see why it's necessary if change is trying to be implemented, but it's also something that the difficulty of doing needs to be also seen. Like, it's not something as easy as telling someone, just understand, think about this person's background. This is something, like, these things are big. They really have, they're not just, we're not just talking about whatever. Like, these are things that, like, yeah, I struggle with those.
Sorry, can I just pose a question? Given the points that you've put forward, which are very intellectual and very understanding, I'd like to ask a question to everyone. Should we be trying to pursue understanding and equality, or should we be pursuing equity?
Wow,
The conversations that we have.
that's so key.
Understanding and equality or equity in conversations.
Yes.
I don't know.
I don't know if they're exclusive to
In
each other.
conversations.
Yeah, I'm
In-
confused.
Wait, so are you saying in the conversations that we talk about, in the conversation that we have, are we trying to strive for feminism that promotes equality or feminism that promotes equity?
Not,
Is that your question?
not just in feminism, we're talking about in any controversial topic we're trying to address. Do you truly believe that equality exists? Can equality truly exist given the social definition and characteristics of human beings? Can we truly pursue equality, or should we be pursuing something more realistic as equity, given that each person should be given what they rightly deserve, and in that aspect, that's not really equality, it is equity, because what one person deserves or should receive as a right or a privilege ideally varies with the person you're talking about or with the context you're trying to refer to. So should we be pursuing equality or equity?
I think it all lies in your definition of equality. If you say someone should get, for instance, someone should get a job based on their qualifications and not based on their gender, that's a definition of equality, and I think that is an attainable definition. But if you say equality is that, I don't know, male and female 100-meter races in the Olympics should be done together, I really don't see that as an attainable goal. So I think it all lies with your definition of equality.
I think that equity is a means to get to equality.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was
that
saying.
that is exactly my
Not
definition of equity. So,
Yeah.
like he said, like I feel like equity comes in those things that you do to make sure everyone is on an equal platform. So
Or starts at the same point. Like
yeah,
the example that you gave with the race, like, or let's say like climbing a wall, right? Equity would be like, and there's two different people with different heights or whatever. Equity would be like giving those same people the same starting point. Exactly.
yeah,
I don't think they're exclusive to each other. I don't think you can be like
yeah.
equity is this thing and equality is this thing. Like they work together. I think.
Okay.
Sir, I want to reply to what Kambura said. She talked about, before the question that Alex posed, I'm paraphrasing. She talked about how it's not necessarily about how you should approach them, because you see, feminism is people's lives. It's gay couples being killed. Feminism is this woman not getting a job just because she's a woman. Is this man being emasculated at work and beating his wife to death at home. I get that, I fully understand that, but you see, not everyone was aware of that. See, before I got to ELA, what was feminism? I had no clue whatsoever. I think I only knew one person in my life that was a radical feminist, and she was a very poor description of what you would call a feminist. And so, with that in mind, when I understand you're angry, but I don't know why you're angry, to be frank, because I'm gonna use my perfect description of a man. I'll use my dad. Respectful to everyone, regardless of your gender. And I personally believe that when I come to a place and you say, men are trash, I'm like, what did I miss? Or something like that. So as much as feminism is not just an abstract topic, feminism is people's daily lives, I think we should take into consideration, you shouldn't demean the factor of people's backgrounds before you come to a place and you say, men are trash, all of you should go fuck yourselves. And people said that for the first time in ALA. No, I'm being frank, for the first time I was in ALA, I was being straight up attacked, and I was so confused. And then I started having conversations with different people, and I was like, oh, makes sense. But you see, until you get to that point, it's just a reflex for me to just switch on my defense mechanism. Because if, let's say, you've never done math before and I come with you and bam, I start teaching you calculus, it doesn't make sense. So as much as it's a real thing, you also have to take background into consideration.
Okay. So from the discussions we've been having, and I can say that everyone has opinions on this, and so I feel like there's two sides to this. On one hand, it is tiring, and it is not fair that the oppressed always have to carry the burden or always have to be responsible for educating the oppressor, no matter how many times they have to, and regardless of the oppressor's potential reluctance to be educated or to listen or to correct themselves. On the other hand, the people who might be on the other spectrum of these conversations, who might not be feminist, for example, who might not be progressive, for example, who might not be politically correct, for example, there is a huge role that we cannot ignore that background plays in the opinions that people hold and how that would allow them to interact with ideas that seem very foreign to them. So now I feel like it raises two questions. So to what extent are people who might be personally connected or who are who for example in the topic of feminism, the oppressed for example, to what extent is it their responsibility to facilitate a conversation that might be receptive to the people on the other side, when we know it is very real that like in many times in these conversations inflammatory comments come up, inflammatory comments, opinions, and people who are personally affected by this topic. So in the face of such, I guess, something that might be so inflammatory, how, to what extent are the people who are affected by these responsible for educating people and keeping their anger in check when they, to them, they do not have any reason to? On the other side of the conversation, when it comes to taking into account like people's backgrounds and like like there is nothing like a universal truth, and for many for like in many cases, and from what, like, if I'm trying to summarize everything that we've said, many people do not have the access to knowledge or experiences that allow them to empathize as they should with certain experiences or with certain opinions that might seem more progressive or more politically correct. So to what extent do both sides, or what roles do both sides have to play in ensuring that we are creating a space that we can have these conversations and have the most out of it? So rather than arguing, we are genuinely interacting with each other, but we also need to be sensitive to each other's peculiarities. But to what extent do both sides have to compromise? Should there be a compromise? Should people have to filter their thoughts when they're interacting with people? Should people not have to filter their thoughts? If there should be a filter, to like, to what extent? If that makes any sense, you know? Yeah.
So I think that if we look at the examples of marginalized groups in history that have come to represent themselves in like modern discourse, let's say the civil rights movement, for example, those weren't spearheaded by people outside of that marginalized group. Like ultimately, they are being oppressed by a certain group of people, and to expect this certain group of people to suddenly like realize that what they are doing is wrong, sort of, yeah, like, yeah, to expect this group of people to suddenly support this cause, even though it is not in their interest, even though that they believe these people are lesser than them, is somewhat of an unrealistic conversation.
Yeah.
But I think that, for example, we get to points in discourse where people see eye to eye. So I, as a man, I as a man, am a feminist and speak to female feminists every day, and I think maybe I'd be like a good representative, or like a good fit to like hold a conversation around feminism. But even though like I don't necessarily have the experiences of feminism, or females or women who bear the brunt of feminism, I think like I could step into that role, but ultimately like it's not just about like the holding of conversation, it's like what happens next. Like just because I agree with this ideology on paper does not mean that I am suddenly relinquished of my privilege. So I think that like we can't, in a way, the responsibility lies with me to relinquish my privilege, but like I've only gotten to a point where I can recognize my privilege because this discourse has been available to me, because people have had the patience to explain it to me, because I have been exposed to this world of ideas. Like until people have been exposed to that world of ideas, we can't even expect them to like want to relinquish their privilege in the first place.
But you have to, like, people with that privilege have to want to, like, I think before you get to the step of like, okay, now you're relinquishing your privilege and like facilitating or starting those conversations in your own circles, before that, you need to want to listen and understand a perspective that you don't have. Like if you're, and I think that's where the frustration stems from, because at least for me and a lot of people that I think identify with feminism, maybe on the campus, for example, it's not that they've never wanted to have these conversations and that they've never understood the importance of discourse, especially with those without those experiences. It's that, okay, fine, I've taken this patience, I'm patient, I'm patient, I'm patient, I'm tolerant, I'm tolerant, I'm tolerant, I'm tolerant, but I can only do so much. It's a meeting thing. If I've had conversations on this campus where somebody knows they don't know about something and they don't understand something, and so they've come up to me and been like, I don't understand this thing. I'm hearing about it and I'd like to understand this perspective that I don't have. And see, in that case, that even encourages me in my struggle to be like, okay, this is my story and this is why I feel like this thing is important. And then it's up to you to be like, I want to understand this and I want to think about this. But it's very hard if it's like what Khauhelo said. I don't want to listen and I don't want to change for both perspectives. So I think, like, bro, I don't know. This whole like, I need to talk to these people and change their perspective. It's necessary, but it's very tasking. Like, it's a very tasking thing to always be like, I need to be patient, I need to be tolerant, I need to, as somebody who's also experiencing this oppression every day, and then to hear something like, you are, what was the word that you used? Entitled, right?
Yeah.
This entitlement that you have as a woman is probably the only entitlement you've ever had in your entire life. If you've been disentitled your entire life in every other sector, it's irritating to hear this one entitlement that you have to this opinion that you know is right. Also take that out for the sake of the people who've caused your disentitlement in every other sector in your life. So to be somebody who's like, for me, for example, as a feminist, back home, in my house, my brother and I have been divided for gender roles, right? Me, I'm like, for me, for example, I can't lock the house. My dad will tell me, you can't lock the house. Your brother is supposed to lock the house because he's the protector, whatever. We have things that have been divided like that in my house, and I'm somebody who identifies as a feminist, and I'm somebody who knows why that's wrong, right? So for me to come outside of my home to a space where I can share my opinions and why I don't feel like this is what I deserve, I don't feel like, and for me to have that one sense of entitlement to just my opinion alone, and then to hear this sense of entitlement is wrong. Take it out, stop that sense of entitlement. After experiencing everything that my entitlement to it has been snatched from me, I think that's where it becomes tasking, especially in this community. That's why it becomes extremely tiring. So you don't want me to have any type of entitlement. Now that I do have entitlement, it's scary and it attacks you. And so, yeah.
I get what you mean.
Wait, sorry. What exactly is tiring? Is it that we're trying to take away your only source of entitlement, or is it the fact that you have to keep explaining and being patient? What exactly is tiring? Because you mentioned it.
I think, like what Alex said, it could be both. But I think what it is mostly, as is most fights against different types of oppression, is that number one, the oppressed has to fix that oppression, as we said. And number two, we're dealing with people's minds, as you guys said, experiences. So it's not like something that I can come and I teach you quadratics, since we're using the math thing, I teach you quadratics and you figured it out. It's something that, like, we're restructuring and reshaping your entire experience, your entire life, right? And I think it takes a long time, and nobody here doesn't understand that. I'm sure Khauhelo understands as a feminist. This is something you're changing people's minds. She understands it's a long process. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's an extremely tiring process, and it's something that, especially because it's so fundamental to someone's identity, it's hard for you to, first of all, realize why it's not common sense. Does that make sense? Like, it's hard for you to, first of all, be like, somebody needs to understand why this is important. Because to me, immediately, I'm like somebody asks me, why are you a feminist? And I'm like, what else?
What else could I be?
What else makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So for me, first, it's like, I have to change that. I have to be like, okay, to somebody it doesn't make sense for this and this reason. Then after that, mind you, I just came from living my life as somebody who's oppressed. So I've come from that tasking job And then now I'm supposed to think about why you don't understand why my life was tasking. And then now I'm supposed to understand the language that will help you facilitate my understanding and your understanding of why that was tasking. And then now I need to be like, okay, you know what? I had experiences, but this person also has experiences that make them not understand my experiences. It's a very like, while I don't think people think that it's that, I'm going to put myself in that group. People think that it's that we don't understand why we need to be patient. We do know that, but you can't separate the fact that while you know something, it is extremely draining and tasking. It's like you know that you need to do this and that to get into college. Doesn't change that it's hard and it's annoying as fuck. And it's unfair that you have to fit into that system despite you not even wanting to work with those people. So I think that thing of like, these people don't know why they need to be patient, why they need to be understanding. It's not that nobody doesn't know. It's that it doesn't change how tasking it is. And I think that's what, for me at least, makes it so difficult.
Okay. Oh, sorry. So I have two questions on that. So one, I just want to thank you for broadening my perspective on the whole feminism topic, because I feel like, for me personally, I've got to understand more about why exactly you fight for the cause. So for my first question, now that we have identified that the fight is a struggle, and it's a struggle against people who are refusing to listen, does that therefore mean that how would you approach the struggle? Like, given that you have clearly identified that it is tough, you get impatient, and these people refuse to listen to you, then how therefore do you approach the struggle, given that these people continue to be stubborn, and these people are not in a position to understand your opinion? How do you approach this issue? That's the first. The second is, for people who passively support a cause such as feminism in this case, passively support a cause, do they earn the right to call themselves feminists? Because within the ALA community, this is a question I've asked myself very many times. Just because I support the belief of the ideology behind feminism in elevating the position of women in society to a point where men and women can see themselves as equals and partners, in me passively supporting feminism as a concept, do I deserve to call myself a feminist? Or do I have to actively advocate for the rights of women fighting towards this equal cause? What earns me the right to be called a feminist?
For your first question of, what's the first question? In like 2 sentences.
Okay. How do you tackle the stubbornness? How do you tackle the stubbornness?
Okay, maybe this is a very problematic comment that I have, but one thing I've said a lot is that feminism has been running for a very long time, and at this point, the people who refuse to listen, the people who have not heard, is because they refuse to listen. If you come from a background where you weren't privileged enough to hear, then open your ears, listen and understand and actually change. But if you have listened and you have heard, but you still refuse, a concept that I like to use is burning the house down. We are going to burn the house down, and you will burn in it. We will say men are trash, and you will be part of the trash. And if you will think that, oh, I'm attacked, you will only understand the concept of this, you are trash, when a woman can't stand in a room with you, in LC diversity with you, because they're uncomfortable and they're afraid you're going to rape them. Only then will you understand in that position when we say we're burning the house down, that we are burning it down. Because there's no need to explain, for me personally as a feminist, there's no need to explain anything anymore. If you don't understand, it's because you have not heard, and you have not, if it's because you just don't want to listen. And I will burn the house down and you will burn it.
Okay, so like we've been talking about the responsibility of people who might be on the opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to facilitating conversations. So for the feminists, it's all, I'm using feminism because it's typically the topic that generates the most controversy and the most disagreements on the ALA campus and generally globally as of now. And like for the feminists, it's the issue of, yes, to facilitate a conversation, they might often have to be patient, but for how long, to what extent, even if it's in the face of something that is potentially inflammatory. So it's not something that they should be having to carry on their own. The responsibility of facilitating good conversation lies on the shoulders of both parties, on the people who might be oppressed or might be offended or might be woken or might be more enlightened to be patient in order to take into consideration the reasons why people might hold the belief that they do and why it might not be as easy for people to relate or to empathize with them, but also on the other end of the people who might not understand how they are supposed to be open-minded and let go of preconceived notion, like how Khauhelo said, or how they're supposed to make sure that they're not being purposefully inflammatory, because that does happen. So we feel like the responsibility should be on both sides, and it's tiring if one side has to carry all that weight. And I feel like that's just a summary of trying to talk about responsibility and compromise and things like that. So now we are the African Leadership Academy, and for people who have been trained to be African leaders, I've often heard, like, people have told me that, like, the culture we generally have created, which we have agreed that sometimes might not leave room for nuance when it comes to political opinions or social opinions or opinion on certain things that might be considered controversial, like gender roles or feminism or things like that. So many people believe, and I've been told, like, the culture that we have around that contributes to making ALA a bubble that is largely detached from the African reality. And if I'm trying to explain that, is we are not going to be at the African Leadership Academy forever. We are going to go back home where the gap between ideologies are even going to be wider than they could ever be on the ALA community. So now, what could the impact of the existing, what are the potential impacts of the existing cultures to our leadership journeys, if that make any sense? Like, do you feel it's something that is going to affect that anyway, or you feel like it's of no relevance? Do you feel like, so what do you guys think about that? The culture around conversations across across ideologies and beliefs, and its impact in our leadership journeys as African leaders.
Okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry to take us back. I know we're trying to move away from this concept, but something that Chimamanda said is that feminism is contextual. That's something that she says in one of her manifestos, right?
Yeah.
So just to move from that, or to take from that, activism is contextual as well, in the same sense. So when I'm here, I expect this community of people to allow to learn, because we are in a bubble. We're in a bubble where we have to hyper take in things and execute them immediately after we take them in as well. That's just the environment of ALA, right? So that is why when I'm here, I will burn the house down, because I expect this specific group of people to be able to step up, because we understand why we're here and we know why we do the things we do, and there's absolutely no reason to be holding on to preconceptions that make no sense to society anywhere, right? But let me go home, right? I burned the house down just slightly, because I understand.
You just put the smoke.
Yeah, I understand the context of
understand.
the people there. We speak the same language when I'm at home, and there's a way for me to communicate what I want to say without having to set the whole thing alight or to, like, cause distraction. I won't call it understanding and being patient and sitting down, no. But we contextualize the way we are activists, and that's the only way our message can reach the people that we're trying to have an impact on. Otherwise, then there's no point. If you just move with the same flag everywhere you go, then there's no point of even being an activist in the same place in the first place, because it's only going to be contextual to one place and not everywhere else.
But what if you're applying the wrong approach to this ALA context? Like, you said that you assume that we're supposed to be, receptive, and that's why you come to ALA and you burn the house down. But I think that assumption is far from right, because as we all know, no system is perfect, and that includes the ALA admission system. So in as much as they try to accept, potential leaders, they accept potential leaders, not ready-made, fully baked leaders. And so there's still a lot of work to be done on every single one of us. Every single one of us still has our different backgrounds that we come from, still has our paradigms that in some cases need to be shifted. And because of that, you cannot assume that everyone here comes with the mindset that they're supposed to be receptive, and therefore you are more willing to burn the house down rather than think of a systematic approach as you would do when you're back home.
Wait, what word did you use? You used the word, but I didn't use that word. I said I expect, not I assume. It's an expectation I have, because there's a bar that's raised when you come here. It's not just 2% acceptance rate for nothing. There's a bar that is raised with coming here. And when you get here, if you're not meeting it yourself, then we will make you meet it. We will cook you to meet it. Because because this is a conversation that was even had way before that. Like, I understand what you're saying, and that kind of is almost going to cover up or blanket the whole concept of people who don't know, and then they come from home and they come with no ideas. But then at the same time, you're in a space that is forcing you to grow. Not forced as in pushing you hard, but like physically, but like in every aspect of your ALA journey, you're forced to grow. And this is fortunately or unfortunately just one of them. And it's only because it's students who are cooking you into it that it feels uncomfortable. And your question is privilege. I mean, your privilege is questioned. Wow. Your privilege is questioned. That is also why it's uncomfortable. So this is just one of the discomforts that just have to force you.
But don't you, sorry, given everything you've said, don't you feel like there's a problem in cooking people speaking in terms of trying to create leaders by force? Because doesn't that imply programming? And programming is one of the biggest issues we have in leadership today, because people are forced, information is channeled into people, and people don't honestly rely on their own passions, their own interests, their own ideologies. People tend to borrow a lot from what the people around them are doing. So if you're talking about people forcing you into a situation where you have to become a leader, then don't you think it wouldn't be authentic and genuine leadership? It would be leadership forced out of what you have been programmed into. And that's very dangerous, because again, the ALA environment teaches people to be very liberal about how they think and how they approach issues. So if the context we're talking about is political leadership, then don't you think, one, the manner in which we're raising leaders could potentially be dangerous in raising conscious political leaders, because people ideally borrow a lot from what other people around them think and are not really willing to be conscious to what the true need is. So if you think back home, let's say we take this context to like our original home countries. Our home countries have different needs, have different types of people who have different types of perceptions. And when we think within the ALA context, we're thinking amongst people who are already very knowledgeable and very conscious. So we're trying to apply principles amongst people who are very conscious, very knowledgeable, in an environment where people have not woken up to the reality of matters as they are. And these are people who are brought up in very cultural backgrounds, brought up in situations where they are only used to what they have seen and have not been exposed to diversity, which is required in leadership. So when we go back home, how do we address cultures that have been pre-existent since the days?
Just to link what David said to what Fatima asked. So this is something, I have a theory. And so Fatima just said something about leadership and African leaders, and then David mentioned something about, you mentioned something about the leaders who we have, and then Alex talked about different perspectives at home. So I recently have been wondering more and more about what type of leaders ALA wants. Like, do they want CEOs? Do they want activists? Do they want presidents? Do they want members of parliament? Like, what is it that we're looking for? And I think outside the whole, like, let's take feminism out of it, right? I don't think ALA's, okay, talking about my country, right? And talking about political positions, right? If I was to go back home and I was to vie for a political seat, my countrymen and women would not give it to me. Why? Not because of my ideologies, but because of aspects of my identity. The privileges that most of ALA students have, economically, socially, do not correspond with the majority of the people at home. So even if we have what our countries need, our people won't let us be there. So before we're even talking about like needing to have these diverse perspectives, I don't even know, like I've been thinking about when I look at the campus, if I see any of us, I'm not trying to be pessimistic or anything. I don't know if we'll even be allowed to be in those positions. We're talking about politics right now. Because people like to have people in power
They're used to
who they're
homegrown,
used to, number one, who are homegrown, who experience, let's say if Kenya's economy was to plummet today, we're going to experience that together. But as me, let's say me and my financial background and my parents, if Kenya goes through intense inflation right now and the economy implodes, me and my family can move out. We're moving to Uganda. It's fine. But people at home don't want that in a leader. Aside from all of these things that we're talking about, I don't even know if the different things that ALA gives us, whether it's liberalism, whether it's us simply us studying abroad is already a reason for people at home not even wanting us to be in those positions. I don't know if it's the same as everybody for people here. The Swahili that I speak, the Swahili we speak, that's a different thing already. The way that we present ourselves, the connections that we have, us even not having gone to high school in Kenya already disadvantages us in terms of the connections that we should have with other people by the time we're older. Like, there's a lot of things, as we talk about African leadership and whatever African leadership means to this academy, and to us, whatever our goal is of this 6,000 leaders, recently I've just been wondering, like, that needs to be clarified as the selection process is done, as aspects of identity are brought into this campus with that goal, if that makes sense. So, just to tie it back to your question, that's one of the things I've been talking about, like, okay, fine, what does an African leader look like, but will we even be, if anybody's looking at political positions, will we even be allowed to be there in the first place before we can start thinking about what it means to be ethical there? Like, I've just been really thinking about that recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I
I
can
think that with any movement, the proponents of that movement have a set of tools to help them progress that movement. And I think that not enough attention has been paid into like the effectiveness of those tools. So for example, like the civil rights movement had like civil disobedience, feminism has like call out culture to an extent. There are varying tools that we use in order to get our agenda to the forefront. And if we don't assess those tools, if we don't like measure their effectiveness, then I don't think like those tools can, I just think there's like a problem with the toolkit that every movement has. And if a movement isn't willing to assess the tools that it uses, then it remains somewhat stagnant. Yeah. So for example, if we were to tie this back to feminism, like call out culture is beneficial to an extent because it outlines certain conduct in society that is problematic. But when it comes to, let's say, men are trash, for example, I'm a feminist, I understand the utility of that word, I understand that it holds a lot of truth. I understand that it doesn't mean to call out specific men and call them trash. I believe that it's made to address a larger systemic problem. But people who don't subscribe to feminism, or men who you would typically call trash, wouldn't want to subscribe to this idea, wouldn't want to come into this realm of ideas purely because this word is antagonistic. While it does hold truth, it doesn't necessarily, make trash men think that, oh, I have to be less problematic overnight. I think that if we are to ultimately, like, feminism is a movement for not only women, but for like altering the minds of men and altering problematic discourse in our society. And if we don't look at how feminism is applied, then some of it can be in vain, some of it can be counterproductive at times. And to tie this back to this idea of leadership, I think that this toolkit doesn't have to happen on the political stage. This toolkit can happen in your everyday life, right? So regardless of like what positions we're allowed to occupy or will be asked to occupy, like the toolkit that we use, or the toolkit that we've been given ultimately is to question these very systems, is to question like my ability to enter this elite group of people or to enter Congress, for example. Like the fact that we're going abroad as well doesn't take away from that fact. I think that by grooming our minds, they're already giving us enough to go into these positions. Like the ALA doesn't promise to knock on the doors of Parliament and force us to be able to go inside. I think it gives us the tools to do that ourselves.
Which
Okay.
is why
So-
I think that's why that clarification is needed, like when making that toolkit, because like as I said, if we were to be able to attain those positions, this toolkit is very like it's what we need. But the question is like access to those types of things in the first place. I think in general, what you said was very profound. Like if the toolkit can't be questioned and like can't be like moved around, I feel like that's the main thing. That's just the main thing.
So the
Okay.
purpose is to create the chain reaction using the toolkit, creating the chain reaction that's effectively going to lead to change in the long run.
I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about. So I don't have like like a conclusion that I've reached. It's just something that's really been on my mind as we do, especially based on the EL sector that we're on currently.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so it's, as much as I'd like for us to continue this conversation, and it's so important that like if we were to continue, we could talk about this for 3 hours or 4. We have to start bringing the conversations to an end. If there's anything you are like the viewers watching, if there's anything you are unsure about or something that wasn't addressed that you feel particularly strongly about, please leave a comment below. We would address them in the next show. We'll also be responding to comments, so we would really love for you to interact with what has been discussed today. But yeah, so we're going to move on to conclusions, closing thoughts, and yeah. Okay, so like I said earlier, sadly has to come to an end. I'm just going to give our concluding thoughts. So basically, like of everything we've said today, what would you like the viewers and everyone here to take away from it? Calling in versus calling out. To what extent is it either party's responsibility to call in? At what point does calling in become redundant and people need to be called out? And when should either be utilized? And what are some healthy ways conversations can be facilitated? When we are engaging in conversations, are we trying to learn? Are we trying to debate? With either answer that you might have, what are some best ways to ensure that we facilitate conversations that create a space where these interactions are allowed to flourish? So yeah, just closing thoughts. We'll start from this side.
Okay. Closing thoughts. I think I'm
Can I say
realizing. Sorry. I was thinking.
Okay.
Oh, you want to go? Okay, please do. I'm still connected.
Last thoughts. First of all, burn the house down. That's burn the house down if necessary. 2, don't think you're self-righteous for knowing anything that anyone else doesn't know. Yeah, knowledge is privilege, to be very honest. Knowledge is privilege and it should be shared and not be used as a tool to fight anyone. 3, which is the last one, you should call out to call in, because if you don't stand and make noise, then no one will come in.
Call out to call in.
Okay.
An intellectual.
Am I going next?
Anybody.
Okay,
literally.
I think similar to what Khauhelo has gathered, one of the things would be that like I don't think wokeness exists. Like I don't think that being woke is an identification point. Maybe like a constant state of like waking, like always waking up.
Waking.
So, yeah, waking instead of being definitively woke.
Whoa.
I think that's one of the things that I've gathered as somebody who always hopes to continuously learn more about perspectives I have and those that I don't and those that I would want to have. And I think another thing that I've gathered is that while it's not something that I've gathered, it's just something that I reaffirmed. While it may be tasking to facilitate any type of change. That's just the nature of change, and it's unfortunate that like the oppressed has to rectify the system, but at the same time, if you're not rectifying the system, then you're kind of giving the oppressor that you're giving them more of their privilege. So I think those are the things I've gathered.
For me, I'll end by quoting Hegel, famous philosopher. We only know what we are by what we are not. So, in regards to this, simply acknowledging difference shouldn't be a reason for the discrimination of those who do not think along the same lines that we do. It should serve as a means of starting a negotiation or a conversation that seeks to create change. And as was said by Kambura, change can be uncomfortable, but the conversation does need to be started in order to create equity, which, as said by Manga, therefore moves to create equality. So, though we are equipped with the tools are the beginning of the chain reaction. And though we stand in a position where we can't immediately effect change, I do believe that we should implant the seed that leads to the questioning of certain ideals and certain standards that do serve to create change in the long run. So as long as we implant the seed, as long as we start the chain reaction using the tools that we have, the tools provided by environment, the tools provided by interaction with other people, and the tools that are provided by understanding of what we are and what we can be and what other people are and how conscious people can be or are, then I do believe that that is the beginning of change.
Okay, so I just want to thank you guys for engaging in the conversation. I'm not concluding, guys. I'm not concluding. So I personally got like, in the end, the responsibility of communicating or interacting across a bridge of like different ideologies is not easy, and it's not a burden that should be carried by either party. So using the topic of feminism, for example, the feminists and people who have been affected by patriarchy and things like that, like
Which is all of
it's
us.
yeah, all of us. Literally, it is sad that we have to be patient to an like not sad. It's not sad, but like that, like we always have to keep on explaining and things like that. But in the end, if we engage in a conversation, our aim is learning rather than debating. We need to create an environment where both parties are willing to discuss rather than just in the mood to defend. And because for many people, the things that we talk against are the things that are so core to all they've ever known and their entire identity system. So a certain kind of interaction will inevitably lead to a defense rather than true unlearning, relearning. That makes any sense. So that on that side, and on the other side of the bridge, people should also engage respectfully with opinions that they do not understand. The fact that you do not empathize with it doesn't mean you are not responsible for being patient as well and being open-minded and letting go of whatever preconceived notion and coming in not to defend but to listen and to learn. For African leadership, I feel like it's something that, like, if we're able to adopt this here, the culture of facilitating conversation across huge differences that will inevitably exist in the communities that we are trying to serve, the better we're able to do it here, the better we're able to serve our communities back home, because over there the gaps will be much wider. We all have to be much more patient than we ever had to be in the ALA space.
Sorry,
Yes, please.
but I think it's also very important to note that, like, if you feel something very strongly and you don't have the capacity at that moment to listen and to be patient, it's okay to state your claim in that time. Like, I think it just depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to, like, create agency for yourself, which sometimes is completely okay, then say what you need to say and leave. Agency is fine. If you're trying to create agency for people who look like you and people who speak like you, that's a different thing. But I think ultimately you should be trying to listen to people and to whatever that thing that you guys have been saying is, that understanding. But sometimes it's okay.
Yeah. So final words, and I cop this from Mr. Jake. Yeah, calling in versus calling out. What I think on that. Calling people out is not a bad thing and it's not wrong, and sometimes it is very necessary, like Manga has said. However, it should not be a first resort, and in many ways calling out as a first resort is a missed opportunity to call in. So patience does have a breaking point, and yeah, so I feel like calling in should be the first point of action, and then calling out can come later on, but it should not be a first resort, depending on the severity of the situation we're talking about. Yeah.
Well, going going to have conversations, and we need to have conversations. We just need to think about how to have those conversations better.
I think in the spirit of culture, I think everybody that's in ALA, that leaves ALA or that is there to come to ALA should keep in mind that it is their individual responsibility to share what they have to say and to be receptive or to open to analyze what is being said. Whether it is a two-sided argument, whether it is about feminism light, or patriarchy, whether it's about race, which is such a huge topic that no matter who you are, whose side you're on, whether you're on a side or not, that you as a person have a responsibility to listen and to be heard. So yeah.
They're on those sides.
Call out to call in.
Okay, we have come to the end of the show. Thanks for making it to the end. If you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, comment. If there's anything that any particular speaker has said that you really want to respond to, please feel free to do so. What did you think about the topic? What is your input? Whatever you said, it will be addressed in the next show, and we'll also be replying to comments. Thank you.
3, 2, 1. Saudi.
Oh,
Thumbnail.
okay.
Saudi.
Let me hold her
Saudi
neck.
Arabia.
That would be a
Oh no,
great.
guys, let's fight.